Dr. Peter Huessy is Senior Defense Associate for the National Defense University Foundation, where he has worked to educate Congress, government, and industry on a wide variety of national security issues, including EMP. Dr. Huessy hosted more than 750 national security seminars. He has lectured at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and the National War College. The National Defense University, where Dr. Huessy works, is in effect a graduate school preparing military leaders for senior leadership positions at such places, for example, as the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Years ago, when I went to work for President Reagan, I walked into the Oval Office, and it's a very small room, but the entire history of the United States is in that room. And the President simply said, "I understand you volunteered to build peacekeepers." That's the MX missile. At the time, we were having a very difficult time with strategic modernization. We had the nuclear freeze. The Soviet Union was busy spending hundreds of millions of dollars to stop our deployment of missiles in Europe. And he said, "I'm glad I found a Democrat to help me." And I walked out of the office, and a couple years later, we established something called the Scowcroft Commission. The reason I'm mentioning this is we have a commission on EMP that did an extraordinary job. That's your trump card. The Scowcroft Commission laid out the blueprint for winning the Cold War with respect to nuclear weapons, including missile defense, including the INF missiles in Europe. And there's some lessons I took out of that commission, having served on the staff. Leadership counts. And Les Aspin put it this way, the former chairman of the Armed Services Committee: don't let the other guy write your press release. Don't let the other guy define the debate. Because if you let the other guy define the debate, they're going to define it in a way that the answer is going to be something opposite of what you want. Follow up, follow up, follow up. Never assume that when you do something or tell somebody and somebody says yes, they're going to do it. Follow up. Everyone's a potential ally. Little did I think that Yvette Clarke, a black congresswoman from Brooklyn, chairman of the subcommittee on terrorism and unconventional threats of the Homeland Security Committee, would come and speak at one of my breakfast seminars, in this case it was a lunch, along with Roscoe Bartlett, and say that this is the top of her list to do. No one would have thought, if I was sitting around the White House, what member of Congress should we go to deal with EMP? No one in their wildest imaginations would have said Yvette Clarke. But there she is. Do your homework. That's probably the most important thing in the world. And the commission has done a lot of your homework for you. Why aren't we protected? What you hear from bureaucrats, politicians, pundits, and the media, you have to translate it. If you say there's a threat, they say, well, who are you? What are you doing here? You're not an expert. And so immediately you're put in the position of, oh my, this guy really knows his stuff. The translation of that is, we didn't invent it, so it can't be true. Now, the intelligence community in particular, if it's not stamped classified, it is not helpful or useful. And so what they do is they take clippings from the New York Times and stamp them classified and put them in a folder. People will tell you, ooh, this is related to missile defense. But they don't say missile defense, they say Star Wars. That's designed to say this is really fantasy stuff. Even if it does have something to do with missile defense, what they're saying is, we don't have to pay any attention to it, and who are you to bring it to our attention because you're making us look like a fool because we didn't realize there was a problem. So this is a way to dismiss it, but then you can tell them, if you build missile defenses all over the place, the number one issue would still be we need to harden everything because an interceptor might miss, correct? And I'm a huge missile defense advocate. So this is not about missile defense per se. It's about protecting America and providing for the common defense. The third thing they'll tell you, what are you selling? I would guess most of you in this room don't make hardening material for critical infrastructures. And therefore, what you're selling is that first sentence or second sentence in the Constitution, that thing that says provide for the common defense. That's what you're selling. The fourth thing is you'll be told, how come I never heard of this? That's code for, do you think I'm stupid? But you can also say, I never heard of EMP before Congressman Bartlett told me about it. So all of us at some time heard about something for the first time, right? That doesn't mean you're stupid. The question is, are your ears open? Do you have an open mind? Is that not what you're meant to do, is find out what other people know? Because do you know everything? Not invented here. What does this mean? Well, let's go look at the North Korean invasion of South Korea. Harry Truman got on his desk 2 weeks before that invasion a CIA analysis saying North Korea could not invade South Korea, did not have the manpower or the weapons to do it for at least 5 years. And that China and the Soviet Union wouldn't let it happen because they would not want to create a war on the Korean Peninsula. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, our State Department and our Defense Department, God bless them, told our president no way it was going to happen. He was just bluffing. The fall of the Shah of Iran in 1979. Our intelligence community told President Carter and Dr. Brzezinski, who's head of the National Security Council, that the Shah was going to be a pillar of Middle East U.S. strength all through the 1980s and 90s. Then, of course, the bombing in Beirut of our embassy there and a Marine barracks, and 9/11. The other thing is people will say, okay, EMP is a threat, but they'll never do that. Pearl Harbor. Why were all our ships parked in Pearl Harbor? Because the Navy knew that under current technology, a torpedo dropped from an airplane will go very quickly to the bottom of that harbor because it can't become buoyant. It can't right itself. Well, what were the Japanese doing during the 1930s? Experimenting with torpedoes in Tokyo Bay that became buoyant very quickly. Something our Navy said couldn't be done was done. And that is why the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, because the torpedoes became buoyant very quickly, even though Pearl Harbor is a very shallow body of water. The East-West Institute report you may have heard of in May of this year released a report saying Iran could not build a solid fuel rocket. Why is solid fuel important? Solid fuel is important because a rocket can stay on alert 24/7. You don't have to fuel it. Every time you hear about North Korea, they often say they're out there with the trucks fueling the rocket. We can see it by satellite, so we have warning. A solid-fueled rocket doesn't need any fueling. It sits there, ready to go. This report said they couldn't build a solid rocket, and they couldn't build a rocket that went 2,000 kilometers. What I love about the real world, as the former Prime Minister of Britain once said, events do screw up your preconceived ideas, and 2 days later, the Iranians launched a rocket into space, put a satellite up. It was a solid-fueled rocket. The range was 2,400 kilometers. Now, the group at the East-West Institute that put this together were all critics of missile defense, 5 from the United States and 5 from Russia. And they issued a report, and 2 days later, it was OBE. Okay? The experts sometimes don't know everything. And then I was at a conference of SAIC not more than a couple months ago and mentioned that I thought the biggest threat in the world nuclear-wise was EMP. And one of my colleagues, won't mention who he is, he's from the intelligence committee, he's retired, he said, oh no, you can't do EMP unless you have a 30-megaton bomb like the Russians experimented with over Kazakhstan. And I said, no, in fact, I asked Peter, and Peter wrote me this scathing response, and I took his name off it, put my name on it, sent it back to this guy.